Again, Jack Dowling, part 3. So we were talking about, I asked if the Hudson Street area was sort of like the Irish ghetto with...
Yeah, right. From Gay Street I moved over to the West Village. I lived on 11th Street and Hudson. I lived on Charles Street. At that time you could pick up and move if you felt like it, anywhere. Mm-hmm. And then I eventually ended up at Horatio and Hudson. They were all cold water flats. Mm-hmm. You know, tubs in the kitchen, you heated your own apartment, that kind of thing. But the whole neighborhood were the men who worked on the docks, because they were all active 24 hours, 7 activities. So there was a lot of small shops, grocery stores that were open all the time. 4 o'clock in the morning, you could go out, perfectly safe neighborhood. And the tenements are filled with men who worked over in the piers. There's a very interesting shot of Christopher Street taken from probably down towards West Street. And you look up and you see the old 9th Avenue L. And then it's astounding because there are cars parked up both sides of the street. The street is filled with people. It's probably taken at some point when people are coming in from New Jersey to work in all of these industrial buildings that were along here, the docks, office workers who worked in the docks, longshoremen who worked in the docks, and then the neighborhood was all filled with, yeah, my neighbors in 641 Hudson, practically all of them worked along the waterfront.
And you said that the women who lived in your building would sit on the garbage cans and watch everyone who walked in?
I think the Italian women in Little Italy did it with a little more class. They would sit on the stoop and they would look and watch. They were the eyes of the neighborhood, or they would hang on tit pillows, as they were called, on the windowsill and keep their eyes up and down the street. Uh-huh. But on Hudson Street, there would always be garbage cans outside the building, and that's where my neighbors would sit. They'd bring pillows down and sit on the garbage can. So, I mean, if you were bringing somebody home, mm-hmm. You had no privacy whatsoever. They wanted to know what was going on, everything that was going on. I mean, I'm not talking about somebody picked up, just even a friend. You know, they would look your friend up and down, and so they were more nosy. I think the Italian neighborhood, they were protective. The Irish neighborhood, they were nosy. You know, they just had to know what you were up to.
How did you feel any tension with the Italians around the San Remo, or were they pretty much live and let live? Or?
Yeah, very much live and let live. There were a lot of restaurants, some of which still exist, which were more kind of Italian family restaurants. Now they're tourist restaurants. Mm-hmm. Some of them are still there. No, it was very easy. It was a very easy part of town to be in. More easier than over here. You get some Irish toughs chasing you if you're in the wrong place at the wrong time.
I heard that, I think it was, what's his name? James Baldwin, I think, was beaten up in an Irish bar near the White Horse because he was sitting with a white woman.
Yeah, doesn't surprise me at all.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, any black person wandering around the West Village at that time was unusual, and everybody would be sort of curious about why that person was here and where they were going.
Yeah, Diane DePrima said that if you were a black man with a white woman, you would get a beating. Yeah. And that the cops would then arrest you and let the aggressors go. Yeah. So
that's not surprising at all.
Yeah. So what exactly, I remember that you moved up to a loft on 42nd Street when you were in 1960-ish?
No, the loft was on First Avenue and 25th Street.
25th Street, okay.
Right, across from the original Veterans Hospital.
And that, so what were you painting at the time? What kind of work were you doing?
Well, I'd been in Italy for a couple of years before that. Mm-hmm. And I went to Italy in 1958. I came back in 1960 and I went back and forth a couple of times. And then I just happened to know some people who were moving out of this loft, and it was the most incredible space I had ever seen. So I moved out of the village and over to the loft. And I didn't start painting until late. I started painting in Italy, and by then I was about 30. Mm-hmm. So Originally, I was painting pretty much abstractly. I really didn't know where to go with that at some point, and I started working with photographs, using them as the basis of what I was doing. I wasn't doing things like Richard Estes. I wasn't doing, you know, perfect reproductions of which those aren't reproductions. He puts a lot more in it than that. But I use a lot of light and shadow, monochromatic paintings, and I had a fairly good run with those. Ivan Karp was at Castelli, and he liked my work a lot, and so he put me in some nice shows. He put me in some traveling shows. Mm-hmm. My work was used on the catalog of the American Federation of Arts traveling show, and he put me in a show at Finch College Museum, which I discovered that my painting was flanked by de Kooning on one side and Alex Katz on the other. We were the only three paintings on the wall. So I thought, okay, that's fine, that's good.
But then the loft was taken away from you in 1970?
Well, the loft was sitting on land that had been condemned way back for under Title I for public housing. And those kinds of things take a long time to process. And they began to tear down buildings north of me. This is the section called Bellevue South, so it was all the way up practically to Gibbs Bay. And eventually they got near my building and began to tell me that I was going to have to move. I had heard through, and I didn't have any money for a lawyer, so I got somebody from Legal Aid Society. And he heard from someone that they were going to give the land to NYU for the expansion of the dental college. So in my innocence, I thought, well, this is against the law. Title I can only be for public housing, not for private development. And so I took it to court, and it went, because of the size of the project and all kinds of other legal things, it went on for almost 3 years, which meant that I wasn't getting much done. I had just had a one-person show uptown at the Banford Gallery, and the stress about what was going to happen to my stuff, I could never seem to get the threat to this place that I called my home. It was enormous. It was a 2,500 square foot loft, 2 bedrooms, a big kitchen, living room, 37-foot studio, and I could see all the way to Long Island City. I mean, it wasn't cramped in. It had plenty of light, stunning top floor, skylights. Couldn't ask for a better studio and living space. So I was really fighting to save it, thinking that the law was behind me. And after maybe 2 years, the final court case, the judge said he didn't see why, no matter what the law was, that art should be standing in the way of public progress. And so they gave me 3 days to get out.
And you were paying like $100 a month or something?
I was paying $100 a month only because the building was then owned by the city, and they had no way of raising the rent, and that's the rent I paid when I moved in.
Which was roughly 1960?
Yeah, 61 maybe.
But you told me this funny story that you wound up in the mailroom of a very unique business.
Yes.
You're 40 years old and you're in the mailroom again.
Well,
that was your line, not mine.
It's true. I already told you that when I had that room up at 58th Street, I worked at Rockefeller Center for the British and Irish Railways, and I was a mailboy.
Yeah.
Okay. I was 20. So as this was all progressing and coming down to an end with the loft, and I knew, and I was really in debt, about $3,000 in debt. I wasn't selling any work.
3,000 or 30,000? 3,000.
3,000.
Yeah.
Which was a lot of money then.
Yeah.
I heard about this. A mutual friend told me about the job at Colt Studio, and they needed a mailboy to take their stuff to the post office maybe 3 times a week. And it didn't pay very much, but it paid enough for me to live on. So I thought, well, I was a mailboy 20 years ago. I guess I can do it again. And I became the Colt Studio mailboy, and then the volume of mail began to increase to an extent where I was working every day. At the same time, the whole legal thing was still going on about the loft. Mm-hmm. And so after I was there a year, they offered me a junior partnership.
But Colt was like sort of classy male erotica?
It was edging up towards erotica. Initially, it was Jim French's. Started out with mostly Jim French's drawings, which were not erotic. They were just male nudes, suggestively so, but no erections or anything like that. Even not very much exposure, genital exposure. Usually they were covered with something. And then he began to take photographs, and again, it was still just still shots of guys, and that was all I don't know how to put it. Things have moved and changed so fast over the years, but at that point, let's say, the country was filled with gay guys who were stuck out nowhere, wherever they were. They had no contact with anything. And so they would order the photographs, or magazines. We started making magazines. Eventually we made films, which were not hardcore. And we grew. We just exploded. And one of the reasons I think, and I can't slam any other company, but we were gay-owned. Most of the others were mafia-owned. We responded to the gay community, particularly guys isolated in Iowa, Wisconsin, somewhere like that, who would write to us and say, oh, if something got lost in the mail, we replaced it. We were one of the first companies that ever did that kind of thing. And
also, I assume you responded to tastes in the gay community, evolving taste.
Well, yeah, I finally got Jim away from the Grecian Guild kind of photographs, and now we're moving into the 70s when the gay community was running around looking like, linesmen from a telephone company, or bikers or cowboys or whatever. It was a costume time, and everybody had a great time. And so I had a hard time convincing Jim that we had to do that. We had to get guys who looked like street guys, who looked like the guy that everybody went like that when they saw him pass him on the street, and not some Grecian guy standing up on a pillar somewhere. That we needed that kind of contact. And he came around, and that's when we really took off. We took off with a number of people, never very famous names at the time, but I won't repeat them now. Most of them are gone.
How long did you stay with Colt, right?
Well, after 4 years, actually there were two partners. It was Jim French, Lou Thomas, and then I was the junior partner. After 4 years, I was thinking it was time for me to move on. I was making pretty good money there as a junior partner because the company was bringing in a nice amount of money. And I didn't want to be with this company for the rest of my wherever. I had no idea where it was going to go. Although I suspected that the industry was going to be heading for hardcore pretty soon because the postal laws were beginning to change. So suddenly, at the end of 4 years, Lou decided to leave and form his own company called Colt Studios. And by doing so, I became a half owner, and we bought Lou out. And then I thought, well, okay, if I'm half owner and I'm 43 or 44, and I'm not going to have much of a pension from anywhere, I'm not going to have big Social Security, this is an opportunity to make some money and take care of what comes down the line for later. So as half owner, I made a pretty good amount of money. And I made most of all the business decisions, which was a big surprise to me because I had never had any business training. But I had an intuitive sense of what we could do that Jim didn't have. Jim was all creativity and his art, and business things would sometimes be secondary in his mind. Whereas I was not that interested in the product. It didn't get me carried away. Pictures would come and go, and it wasn't something that I get fascinated by. So I can make decisions that scared him. Something like, we had a small magazine, can't remember the name of it right now, but it was a series, and we'd order 1,000 at a time, and they'd be gone in no time at all. And Jim said, I'm going to have to order another 1,000, or do we need another 1,000? I said, no, we're going to order 5,000. And he couldn't understand that. And I said, look, it's very, very simple. We order 5,000, it costs us 59 cents a piece. our postage and handling is $1.25. We're home free on this one. Doesn't cost us any. So, and it was a fair thing to do. They were good publications. They were well done. They sold, I think, for $5. And they're famous now. Everything from Colt is collectible.
Did Colt go out of business, or did it just fade away, or get
No,
bought?
it still exists, but it's not owned by Jim anymore. Jim and I never had the best relationship in the world. Jim moved to California early on when Lou was still there, but and we got along well. But it was difficult with him being in California and the business being run out of New York. He would send me the mock-up for a magazine. I would say that it looked great. I'd send it back to him. Then he would take it to the printing company. The printing company would print the magazine, let's say 1,000 of them. Then they'd be shipped to New York because the office was in New York and the mail went out of New York. So that was costing a lot of money. At the same time, we were still making a lot of money. So we didn't really factor that in as a negative. But eventually, he was getting a bit worn down with the whole thing and thinking about maybe he wanted to get out, maybe he wanted